Welcome to our introductory lecture on Marcus Aurelius. This is one of the most remarkable figures in the history of Western civilization. He was the last of the five good emperors. He was born in 121 and died in 180. He was the successor of Antoninus Pius, who had adopted him as on the Council of Hadrian, who took a liking to the young Marcus and recognized his great potential. Hadrian was a Hellenophile. He loved the Greek culture and truly exemplified what we've discussed in the last couple of sessions, this combination of Greek and Roman culture, the Greco-Roman world, which is the basis, or at least one of the fundamental bases of Western civilization. This synthesis of Greek high culture and Roman organizational and military ability. The 2 centuries after Augustus takes over the Republic and transfers the whole of the authority of the realm to himself in what was called the Principate, the thought being, the fiction being that the emperor was merely the first amongst the citizens, the princeps, the prince. But in fact, of course, all of the auctoritas was invested in that one man. That also hid something more profound, though, which is that authority depended on the might of the Roman legions, and that would become more and more evident as things fell apart after the reign of these 5 good emperors, when it became clear that if you were a general who wanted to make a play for the purple, you just had to get enough of the legions on your side to beat the rivals that would emerge. In any case, it must be said for Caesar Augustus that he did restore peace to a realm that was riven by civil war, by catastrophic civil conflict, and initiated what we call the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, which lasted for these couple of centuries. And that is a great good, except for some significant blips and some strange emperors in between. These 2 centuries were relatively calm within the boundaries of the empire. Trajan was the second of the 5 good emperors. He is the one who oversaw the extension of the Roman frontiers to the greatest extent they would reach. After him, we have Hadrian. Antoninus Pius had adopted Marcus Aurelius along with this other person, Lucius Verus, and he had taken on Marcus as an apprentice, as it were, in power. And Marcus watched Antoninus Pius be emperor and learned from him. And when Antoninus died in 161, Marcus acceded to the throne, and he did one of the most remarkable things in the history of power. He he petitioned the Senate to take his adopted brother, Lucius, I'm going to do it one way, Lucius Verus or Lucius Verus, I want to be consistent there, but Lucius Verus, he petitioned the Senate to make his adopted brother co-emperor, basically. This is the first time we'd ever had a collegiate principate. That is, Lucius, who was at the time already consul, these are the components that make up an emperor, right? He was consul, so he already had the consular office. What Marcus wanted to share was the tribunician power, the proconsular imperium, and the title Augustus. And except for the office of Pontifex Maximus, which Marcus retained for himself, that meant all of the prerogatives of the imperial throne were shared between these 2 men. Marcus sought this freely. It is really a kind of beautiful thing. Unfortunately, Lucius Verus wasn't really the best. He was sent to the east by Marcus to deal with a threat from the Parthians, who were the force behind the Persian Empire at that time, at the configuration of the Persian Empire at that time. Under Lucius Verus, the Roman power got into Mesopotamia, but also unfortunately brought back a plague, the first pandemic we know of in the Roman Empire, what we call the Antonine Plague, which more or less from 165 to 180 may have taken up 10% of the population of the Roman Empire. It was devastating. And this is one of the two demographic factors that press so hard on the principate of Marcus Aurelius and set up the disasters of the following century, what we call the crisis of the third century, when everything kind of almost fell completely apart. So what we have is the other demographic problem, of course, for the incursions by the Germanic tribes. In the last decade of Marcus's life, he was basically having to fight wars. The Macromani, the Quadi, other Germanic tribes crossed the Danube, even got into northern Italy. So Marcus had to go on campaign. It was on campaign that he would write most of the Meditations. So this is a very a powerful testament that the most powerful man in the world, a great warrior, is taking time to write these very moving meditations about how to live life. So he spends that last decade dealing with both Germanic incursions, and that's one of those demographic things that really the Roman Empire couldn't finally deal with, obviously, and also a revolt by a general, Avidius Cassius, and towards whom and his party Marcus demonstrated clemency. So he was living out the philosophical virtues here. Because of the revolt of Avidius Cassius, Marcus couldn't press his advantage on the Danubian frontier, so he had to leave a kind of sub-Romanized set of tribes, the Germans who had been kind of partially Romanized, leave them as guardians of the frontier, and that was the beginning of this general process of de-Romanizing the frontier. This is, again, a major factor that would play out. Lucius Verus had died in 169, perhaps from the plague. When Avidius Cassius has his revolt around that time, Marcus elevates his son, Commodus, to be co-regent, doing the same thing that he had petitioned the Senate to do with Lucius Verus. He makes Commodus co-Augustus in 177. This is his greatest mistake, and it makes us question this whole project of the Philosopher King, because he was indeed the Philosopher King. I don't know if it's ever happened before that the coincidence of kind of a true philosophical spirit and such might have been combined. But there it was, the project that you've seen Socrates, Plato, Aristotle in various ways try to realize. Well, it came to fruition in this man. And we saw with Plutarch trying to influence his circle of powerful Roman elites with the biographies. We read the one about Alcibiades. The five good emperors had such a good run because they all, from Nerva on, had used the adoptive principle. And it's partly because they didn't have their own children, but they adopted, based on what merit they could surmise, a son that would take over. So it was not based on a dynastic principle of blood succession. The one who broke that chain was Marcus Aurelius himself, the Philosopher King. He raises his son Commodus, who was a madman, and his eventual assassination, Commodus's eventual assassination, the disturbances that followed that directly fed into the crisis of the third century. Other factors, because of all the wars and the largesses that Marcus gave out, the imperial treasury was bankrupt. So we love Marcus because of his philosophical spirit. He did well by a lot of measures, but in fact, it is the case, and probably due to forces that were huge, the demographic forces, right, that are beyond any human's control. The crisis of the third century was already brewing by the time he died. Okay, that's enough for his biography and the general state of the Roman Empire. The Greco-Roman culture, before Christianity caught on in the empires, that would happen a century and a half or so later. The elites that were more philosophically minded, they became Stoic. And this is a school of philosophy that was founded by Zeno of Citium in around 300 BC in Athens. So Athens is always there. It's so important. The city just never relinquishes its hold on the human spirit. He founds the Stoa Poikile. This is where he held his school, and it was on the Agora, at the central marketplace of Athens. So he was doing even more radically than Plato and Aristotle with their schools, which were not right in the center. Zeno put it right in the center of Athens. Sulla, the Roman general, sacked Athens in 86 BC. That closed the philosophical schools, and it would not be until perhaps Marcus Aurelius himself endowing 4 philosophical chairs, academic, that is Platonic, Peripatetic, Aristotelian, Epicurean, and Stoic in Athens, that it seems that philosophical life institutionally returned to Athens. So it took centuries after that disaster. What Stoicism puts forward is something that I believe Pierre is correct, that this was generally the case for the schools of philosophy of the ancient world. Philosophy is a way of life. We think of philosophy now as an academic in the little a sense of the word, an abstruse exercise, something that has nothing directly to do with how you live your life. But it was the case with Platonism, Aristotelianism, and certainly with Stoicism, perhaps above all, that this was the way to live a flourishing human life. That was the goal. It wasn't to have clever propositions. The goal was to master the art of living. That was Stoicism's mandate. Stoicism's great inspirations were Socrates and Heraclitus. So we've dealt with both of them in this semester. It should be very exciting to see all these things come together. Socrates, that sense of virtue is the only good, and no one can take that good away from you, and no one would be unvirtuous except out of ignorance. And these are principles the Stoics really held on to. And Heraclitus, especially with this metaphysics of change, that everything changes, that the Stoics wanted us to have serenity. That prayer that goes back to Reinhold Niebuhr, right? God grant me the serenity to accept the things I can't change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. That's a very Stoic kind of prayer. One of those bases of that kind of serenity would be to recognize everything's going to change. Everything always changes. So sometimes you're up, sometimes you're down. The wheel of fortune spins, and so on. And if we can just be virtuous in the midst of all of this turmoil, that is the great good. That's the way to live life. And so the great Stoic mantra was live according to nature. And that meant 2 basic things: to be rational, to live according to our logos, the logos of the universe, according to our intelligence, and our sociality. That is, that we are all part of one human whole. So they literally come up with, they advance the notion of cosmopolitanism, that we are first, as humans, citizens of the world, of a cosmopolis. And that the way to live according to nature, the way to live a good human life, a flourishing human life, is to use our intelligence to live harmoniously with others and to contribute to the common good. It's a beautiful vision. It's a vision that if you're going to have an imperium, if you're going to have an ecumenical whole that gathers and many civilizations together, you would want this kind of perspective in your heart. So this is the Stoic view, is that we do these exercises. For instance, like the meditation on evils, that you get up in the morning and you know, as Marcus reminds us, you're going to come up against people that are annoying, malicious, trying in various ways. And if you imagine that, you're not going to be as thrown off guard when that happens. And the Stoics always tried to counsel us to recognize there are 2 different things in the world. You can divide, when it comes to action, the world into 2 realities. On the one hand, there are the things you can control, such as my chosen opinions, judgments, values, and decisions to act. And then there are the things you can't control, everything else. And so if something happens to me that I don't like, I have to ask myself, has that changed my virtue? Has it changed the things that are under my control, even if fortune has become very dark and has in fact thrown me down? After the destruction of the Athenian schools, Stoicism became decentralized, and so we only have, and this is great sadness, we only have the writings, significant writings, especially of three great Stoics. We have Seneca, who served under Nero, so that's an interesting question, a combination of power and philosophy. Epictetus, who started out as a slave in the household of Nero and eventually had his own school of, so he taught Stoicism. And then, of course, we have Marcus Aurelius himself. The two things that we could really see the difference, for instance, between, well, Aristotelianism and Stoicism. Stoicism holds that anger is always wrong. Obviously, Aristotelianism holds that there's a mean, a correct measure when it comes to anger. I think the Aristotelians are correct, but I think the exercises that the Stoics would have us do, recognizing that if someone cuts us off on the freeway, we should be thankful that that person is there to test our virtue. And to think this way, to keep reminding ourselves of these facts about things that are in our control, the only good is virtue, and so on, that really does lead to greater serenity. Something that I just think is a mistake is that the Stoics did believe that suicide is always an option, and I think that I think skews the kind of calculus as far as how one lives one's life, but I just put that out there. So I want to end by thinking about the question that kind of hangs over all of this, and that is, how should we harmonize wisdom and power, both personally and then as a society? The project of the Philosopher King already, of course, talks about philosophy and power and how those two relate. We've grappled with that, and we need to continue to grapple with that politically even now. But we also need to think about this personally. How should I harmonize wisdom with the power that I've got in my life to do this or that? Is it enough to just accept serenely things that happen, or should I also push back against things? Which things should I push back against? Which things can I not push back against? Which wars should be fought personally, collectively? What factors, like overwhelming demographic factors, do we just need to see? And which factors are there that for us to vigorously change, grapple with? These are the things that each of us, I think, has to take seriously in our lives, because we all have this power to make a large effect in the circle around us, the people that love us, the people that we find ourselves opposed to. And I do believe that Stoicism teaches us essential lessons, maybe not all correct, but a lot of it is very beautiful and I find personally quite useful in trying to gain a serenity from which maybe we can build a better world together.